For ordinary people, banking sector is a bit of a distant and alien planet sometimes, hard to understand and a bit fearsome at times. But whether we realize it or not, it is like a nervous system of our societies. If it works fine, that's all right. We don't even notice that. But when things go wrong, it really hits us, and hard, in our everyday lives. I'm joined now by Dr. Kamil Pruchnik from European Investment Bank. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
A man who examined 200 years of various banking crises all around the world. An exceptional analysis indeed, you can see here. It's called Riddles of Banking Crisis. That's the English title. The book is out now, but once revealed, the riddles or the mysteries are no longer mysteries. They're rather lessons for all of us to learn inside and outside of the banking sector. Thanks for joining me here on TVP World. So what's the most important lesson to learn from your analysis from this book?
I think that two main takeaways will be the following. Number one is, it is very easy to take it for granted that the banking sector is stable, because in our lifetimes, like in Poland, many people did not experience the banking crisis. Therefore, it's a very alien concept for them.
It's always been fine, and it will always be fine.
Exactly that. So you cannot take it for granted. The path to have a stable banking crisis is to have a stable banking system is that you always need to take care of it. That's number one. And number two, when you have a banking crisis, the banking crisis is so painful and so unpredictable that it is comparable almost to a military invasion in a given country.
This is one of the interesting things that you have written in this book, is that banking crisis can be even more damaging than wars. Yeah, it's quite surprising, actually. Is that not an overstatement?
So obviously, you cannot compare like to like wars and banking crisis, right? Because you have many other dimensions of costs of human tragedy when you have war. But from a pure economic point of view, when it comes to recessions, there was a study conducted recently by economists from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development that I actually quote in my book. And what they figured out, looking at the last 200 years, is that the average recession that was resulting from a war was roughly 7 percentage points of GDP. At the same time, not my research, but research done by Harvard economists, World Bank economists, very, very smart people, indicate that the average recession after a banking crisis, also in the last 200 years, varies between 7 percentage points up to 9 percentage points.
That's bad.
Very bad.
That's very bad.
Very bad.
Are we anywhere near any banking crisis now that we could actually experience and suffer from?
I would say one of the beauties or the riddles of the banking crisis.
That we don't know.
Exactly. So it's very
but
easy.
You should know. I mean, you've written a book about 200 years of banking crisis. If you should know, then who should?
So, there's many economists that would say we're going to have a banking crisis or a stock market crisis, something like this, in the next 6 months. There is this economist, very good economist, Norio Rubini, who has been titled as Dr. Doom, because he was one of the few economists who foresaw the great financial crisis in 2008. But the same economist has managed to foreseen 20 recessions, out of which only 2 actually happened. Yes? So it's very easy to always be pessimistic. If you always are pessimistic, on the line,
most of the time, these predictions don't work.
But then what I wanted to say is that, when you read works such as Nassim Taleb, the Black Swan, etc., the thing is you don't know when it hits you. Once it hits you, you know it's there, and after a while, it's very easy to make a retrospective narration. Oh, it was obvious.
Okay. Yeah, it was always like that. Yeah. It's fine to predict the future. Everybody can predict the future, or rather, everybody can predict the past. Yes. Yes. But we in Poland haven't experienced that much the 2008 crisis for a variety of reasons, obviously. So perhaps people don't really feel it. But when a crisis, a banking crisis, a wide banking sector crisis happens, how does it affect our everyday lives?
So imagine that you cannot take your cash from your ATM. Imagine that you cannot make any payment transfers. Imagine that your employer after 2-3 days cannot pay your salary because his bank that was used to make this payment transfer is no longer existing. Imagine that all of the retirement savings that you had, that you invested into given stocks, are gone. Imagine that you are fired 5-7 days later.
Can you give me an example of any country that would be in a way close to us, close to Poland, that has gone through a case like this?
This happens quite often and happened quite often in the past, but there is a change in the last, I think, 20-30 years globally, where the state is way more active. So from a political point of view, politicians recognized once a banking crisis happens, it is suicidal to do nothing, because nobody is going to vote for a politician.
Shouldn't they do something before it actually happens?
This is one of the key takeaways from my book, yes, that you need to do.
All right, one of the conclusions from your book is that some countries actually get hit by crisis in a much more serious way and much more frequently.
Yes.
And that would be the United States, for example. Yes. Others get through it in a sort of milder way and less frequently. That would be Canada. Yes. What's the difference? So what makes a country prone and vulnerable in that regard?
So here the key takeaway is that what determines how often you have a banking crisis is what is the type of the state involvement in the banking sector. If you have a state that is trying to arrange regulations, supervision, in a way that is going to benefit some specific group of people, that they would receive cheaper credit while the other ones would not.
That's the United States.
Exactly.
We're talking, okay.
Yes. Then what is happening is that for many years you can have abundant access to credit for these privileged individuals, but this may create a lot of systemic risks.
Okay, so when politicians and politics mess around with banking sector, that's usually a bad sign for the future? Do I understand it correctly?
I would definitely say so, yes.
But when actually a crisis happens, the state is actually required to step in and take some decisions, right?
And this is a very good paradox that you just mentioned, because then if you have, in the past, what we see is that, I mean, banks fail. Let's differentiate. When you have a bank that fails, that is okay-ish, because if you have one bank in a country, exactly, but then the chances are that your account will be transferred to another bank that took over the struggling bank. So it's okay if you have, some banks failing.
We do have a similar situation in Poland now. Okay.
Yeah, with one of these banks. But if you have systemic banking crisis, everything is in the turmoil. Exactly. And what we can see is that the systemic banking crises are the ones that are normally triggered or orchestrated by the state. And then you have the banking crisis, and then there is the excuse to have more state involved in the cleaning process. So you have a vicious circle there, which is very difficult to break.
Where's Poland on that scale? You don't write about Poland in this book, but by the way, why not write about Poland? So
there's few comments that I need to make here. First is that I wouldn't like to comment specifically on specific countries due to the role that I have professionally right now, so I need to be very careful. And all of what I'm saying is personal views and academic views. At the time I was writing this book, I was mostly looking between the year 1800s until 2016. But now what I would say is that the key lesson for Poland would be it is very easy, I would say in less than 3 years, you can change with political interventions a stable banking crisis into a very unstable one. So
we're talking about specifically about Poland?
I'm talking about any country.
Any country, okay.
Any country. Okay. In less than 3 years, in a democratic society, if you have a strong populistic forces that are, playing with various regulations, supervision, intervention, etc.
It is very easy to destroy the system.
Very easy.
We had 8 years of populists in power. Did they destroy the Polish banking system?
There have been definitely things that can be questionable or that have been suboptimal. And they have definitely resulted in a number of potential challenges. I would say
let me just rephrase the question, or put it again. Did they destroy the system in any way?
I wouldn't say destroy. This didn't happen, fortunately. is banking sector now in a more difficult position than it was a few years ago? I would say yes. There's a number of issues that can be happening.
Are we ahead of a banking crisis in Poland? Then, just to...
I would say, if you ask me, are we going to have a banking crisis tomorrow? I would say no. All right?
What about next week?
Probably no as well. But here I'm going to repeat. Remember, banking crisis always hits you at the moment you least expected them. Yes? So you don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen.
So what does it depend on, really? When people like you, when other bankers were, you know, presidents of banks, or even finance ministers, they should be aware that something is happening, that something is coming.
And that's a very good point that you do. But for instance, it's not always that obvious. I give you an example. When you had the recent global financial crisis in the US, one of the key challenges that Bernanke, who was the head of Fed, Timothy Geithner, who was the head of Fed for New York, and Paulson, who was the head of Treasury, had, was that at the onset of the crisis, the structure of the banking sector was so complicated, and this is in their memoirs. They said they had no idea what is the scale, what is the interconnection picture, what is actually happening. They were literally running like headless chickens, trying to figure out what is actually happening. So it's not that obvious that everybody knows everything.
Okay, so you actually mentioned one particular case that sort of triggers the banking, and that would be political involvement and political messing around with banking sector. Are there any other risk factors?
So banking sector can always, is always vulnerable to shocks. So think about it if you have war. War can trigger a banking crisis. You can have a situation also where you have very, very tough environmental crisis. In the past...
It's all happening, by the way. That's why I'm asking whether we are anywhere near a banking crisis, with all the other crises that we are going through.
But what is... So there's many things that can trigger failures of individual banks. But in the past, very rarely would they alone trigger systemic banking crisis. You would need to have a combination, in most cases, of negative shock, think wars, tsunamis, things like that. This happen as triggers. But then you would have state involvement that actually weakened the banking sector, and this is why the whole collapsed, and not just separate respective banks.
Okay, just last question before we go, because time is running short. But okay, let's make an experiment. I listen to this conversation in 5 years' time. So that's why I'm asking this last question. What is going to happen to our banking sector in the period of next 5 years, considering all those risk areas such as the war, political turmoil, and so on and so forth? What is your feeling about it? What is your intuition about it?
So I would say, you know, it's just me guessing, right? But I would imagine there's a number of shocks, but in the next 5 years or so, there's going to be also a number of boosts that's going to happen. I'm thinking about the Recovery Resilience Fund, cash that's going to be in Poland, that's going to boost the economy, a lot of transformation. So this would be good investments. But in the unlikely event, I'm saying unlikely event, yes, that we would have a mild version of a banking crisis.
Turbulences?
You would have a recession of at least 5 percentage points, and you would have a significant slow of pace of growth for the next 10 years.
Right, okay.
So, yes.
Check you on that.
All right.
In 5 years. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much.
Kamil Pruchnik, thank you.